Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. Today is going to be our next episode in my Astro interviews series. I've been bringing lots of people to come and hang out with me and to talk a little bit about the astrologer's approach to being with a client and being in an astrology session. Our guest today is the illustrious Fernando Raul of Fernando Raul Astrology. Thanks so much for hanging with me today, Fernando.
Hello there, Dustin. Thank you once again for inviting me to your channel, and I hope your audience enjoys our exchange.
I'm sure they will, Fernando, and I always love chatting with you.
Me
now,
too.
For everybody,
so far so good.
Yeah, so far so good. I'm gonna throw on a little picture that I've prepared for everybody. This is
Who's that guy? Who's that guy?
This handsome-looking chap with this nice looking hat
that's
here.
from 2017, by the way.
Oh, no kidding! Eh? Yeah, it wasn't from 2001.
More or less the same, right?
I look there.
Yeah.
So we've got Sagittarius rising. You are Aquarius moon, which would be in the third house in Aquarius. And I believe you've told me that that's where your Jupiter is.
Yes.
It's always nice to have the moon with Jupiter.
Yes.
You have your sun is in Scorpio, and the sun is very important. Not only is the ninth lord of your chart, but it is your Atma Karaka.
Yes.
So having the ninth lord, the sun, as your Atma Karaka, there's a lot of indications here for ethics, for sticking to a concise morale, and for it to be in the sign of Scorpio in the 12th house of Sagittarius means that you probably put a lot of your dharmic following and a lot of your dharmic consciousness, I believe, is being led
or
towards,
dharma
in general, is being led towards the internal world of the human dynamics of spirit, of karma, and all things related to the 12th house.
Very good.
It's very
so
cool.
far so good. Yeah.
And the fact that you have the sun with K2 there, I think really gives a lot of extra emphasis to this idea of the K2 energy, which relates a lot to karma, which relates to a lot to where we've come from, and the energy that we have with us that we're trying to use to our best effect in the world, if I could put it that way.
Very good. You know your shit. Yeah.
Cool. I love it. I love it, Fernando. So thanks for allowing us to have a little glimpse of your chart here.
Sure.
And I'm very glad to be hanging out with you today, like I said.
Yeah, and you know your shit. That was concise. Very good.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, Fernando. So this is Fernando Raul, and what I figured I'd do is I've got a list of questions that I've been asking every astrologer that kind of comes out and hangs out with me, Fernando.
Okay.
I've already had you on in my special guest playlist where we talk about some specific things. Now I'm just going to shoot the shit with you about being an astrologer.
Now, or trying to be one. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to be.
Because what I say in my videos is that I am a modern man trying to be a traditional astrologer in an ubiquitous modern world. So it's kind of it's difficult. But yeah, one tries to be what one aspires to. Yeah.
That's right. And I often think that, like astrology is one of those things where really the best astrologer you're going to get is one that has a lot of experience, that has been doing it for a long time, and that has that. But at the same time, astrologers like you and I, who are young and are trying to get our fingers into this thing early, we just have to live by that caveat, which is that we are growing. We are learning in our practice, but we are doing it. Because if somebody doesn't do it, how will we ever get to be an astrologer who's been doing it for 20 or 30 years?
I just want to say one thing before we start is that when we're talking about sessions with clients or sessions overall, people have to understand, and this is probably something you understand and you've lived so far, that when you are with a client, something else is happening bigger than you and the client. It's an encounter, and you might say it's destiny or it's predestined or if it's serendipitous, but the idea is that when you have a client astrologer or a client artist, as it was the term that was used in 17th century, the 7th century book of William Lilly, which is really good, Christian Astrology, which was like the last traditional book that we got after, the things that we've discussed in
That
previous
we've
videos.
lost. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The thing is that the relationship between the artist and the client is something very intangible, magical, and things happen in a session that transcend one's preparations, one's training, one's
skill set.
knowledge, and skill set. It's, if God permits a good session to happen, it's because God permits it. And if something bad happens, it's because God wills it. You see, and some people say it's karma, and to a certain degree you can see it like that.
Yep.
But the dynamics that happen when you start helping a person with astrology is something that is very difficult to understand unless you've lived it. So I just want to say that before we go and talk about this, because the idea of massification, of massifying a protocol in order to deal with people and astrology is something that you have to discover by yourself. Because one thing is the training. Yes, one thing is knowing astrology, right? Studying astrology, reflecting upon astrology, and teaching astrology. That's one thing, right? That's like a whole category.
The YouTube world and the teaching.
No, not only that. No. Well, yeah, you could say YouTube world, but more than that, that is different to dealing with people.
Very much so. Counseling.
You have to, not only that, counseling is another thing within that, but the idea of dealing with people is just, two different things, right?
Yes,
and
certainly.
That is something that I have to emphasize, because the dynamics between artist and client cannot be massified, and it's very intangible, it's very magical, and what happens between a client and an artist is private. It's like the relationship between a priest and a person, or a guru and a student,
doctor.
Or an emir and a person who goes to the mosque. I mean, there is a spiritual communion to a certain degree. That
especially if that's allowed to happen.
Yes, and that's what I mean. If it's allowed to happen, it happens. And what I mean by that, it's that when you are with a client, it's not like you're selling them potatoes at the supermarket, or like you're selling them, a generator at a hardware store. No. It's more like the relationship that a priest has to a person who comes to him, or like like today in modernity, a client that goes to a psychologist. The idea of privacy, the idea of confession, the idea of communion is there, and that's something magical that people have to take into consideration when you're doing traditional astrology. So that's what I wanted to say before. Yeah,
thank you, Fernando. And it makes me think of the fact that the astrologer is really in a sacred role and position in society. They can be if they abide by that certain type of consciousness. So I think that
just like any priest, like any rabbi, like any emir, like any
kidding. And so that's why I suppose it's very good for each client to have a certain, you can't be attached to the idea of trying to seek a sacred guru experience out of an astrologer, because the astrologer has to meet you at that level, and you have to meet them at that level, and it's going to be the thing. I often relate, as a Scorpio, I'm sure you'll understand, I'm a Scorpio myself, and I often relate things to romance and even to marriage in a lot of ways. And when you are getting with a partner, it can be sacred. Both people have the capacity to make it a sacred thing.
It should be sacred, if you ask me, but
yes, I agree.
But that's not the reality of the modern world right now.
You're right. But if the intention is there, and the genuine instinct is that I'm going for God, and this person seems to be the medium for God's communion with me right now. And if you can take it at that level, you can be detached about it, but still be attaining this sacred experience. It's just that when you get into this sort of world, you have to be discerning about these sorts of things, even if it's a sacred, like in the same way how two people can become married, and like I don't feel like I'm God, and you don't feel like you're God, but after they get married, years later, they might look back and say, hey, look at that was God happening. You don't know it in the moment, but afterwards it might have been the thing.
Many times, yeah.
Many times it is. And it's the same way, I think, with an astrologer. ultimately, it's just good to be discerning about this dynamic of things, because I think that if the inclusion of that divinity and God consciousness is there, you will go to many astrologers and you will get a little bit of God from each one. And this is the important point, is not to think that any one astrologer is going to necessarily be the only gate to the divinity that's inside yourself.
No, and you see God in everything. So yeah.
Wonderful, Fernando. Wonderful, pal. So now, Fernando, is I guess I could just start rolling with our questions. Did you have any other points you wanted to add there?
No, I just wanted to say that because it was something that was in my mind. Yes.
Very poetic, Fernando. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So one of the first things I'd like to ask, and this is just a fun subjective question. Do you believe that there are different astrologers for different purposes, and that each astrologer's style is likely biased by the energy or vibe of their own chart?
Yes,
of course.
But once again, we're talking about traditional astrologers, and I recommend people to go to traditional astrologers because modern astrologers, as we've said before, in my opinion, are not real astrologers. I mean, even though some people might use traditional techniques, and most people today, are modern people doing traditional astrology, me included. But the idea of the recognition of that must be there. So what I recommend people, if that they want to go for the truth, then go for a person who sells themselves or aspires to be a traditional astrologer, like I do and many others, right?
Well, you know what's cool about that is it makes me think that while there is the bias of each artist, each astrologer's energy, if you are applying yourself to a tradition, that will filter the ego of the astrologer, because
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean, you mean like distill it, or like
distill
what
it.
do you mean by filter?
Filter the ego.
Does it mean that it's gonna grow, or is it gonna disappear? What do you mean by that?
Well, by having a tradition, you have an object that is engaging with the ego and nature of the astrologer. Whereas with modern astrology, anybody can pick up any technique, and the ego of the astrologer is bound to pick up the techniques that the ego of the astrologer thinks is good. But with a tradition, you have set rigid ideas about how to apply the astrologer's karma to the client's karma in a way that kind of safeguards a little bit of the astrologer's ego.
Ego is an invented term that doesn't have 200 years. It's just,
I'm with you on that.
It's a modern way of talking about
what
the
I
person,
more mean
their
is
spirit,
the immature tendencies of the astrologer.
The nature of the astrologer.
Right. The unconscious aspects of an astrologer that's
going to be control. Everywhere. That's going to be
no matter what, person. Even in a
no matter if it's modern or tradition, it's going to be everywhere.
Okay, good. That makes sense to me.
But in the tradition, you have a law, right? And you have something solid, and you have precepts, and you have rules.
Right. This is what
and you have, or you try to get there, right? In the other hand, modern astrologers don't tend to have that. They use a lot of intuition. They use a lot of psychology. They use a lot of psychosis, personal
pop psychology,
psychosis. Yeah, and not only that, they're just, people call them life coaches now, and people call them a lot of names, and that is not astrology. That is just modern commercial psychological help, entertainment, exploitation to some degree. Modern counter modern astrology is just entertainment more than anything else. So before you start that, you have to do an analysis of yourself of why you want to go to an astrologer. Do you want to have fun? Do you want to have something cool? Well, go to anybody, right? If you just want to have somebody caress your ego, right?
Or
then go to anyone, no, I mean, it's not there's maturity, it's just the nature of man. If you're above certain age, you're a man, or you're a woman, right? And after Saturn returns. So what I wanted to say is that it depends, what do you want? And this is very important, because if we're going to get to talk about the client artist relationship, the astrologer is not there to entertain. He's not there to be a monkey. He's not there to coach you. He's not there to pick you up the floor. No.
Mm-hmm.
You go to another type of person if you want that. The
Mm-hmm.
astrologer is there to answer your questions. And if you
Uh-huh.
have mediocre questions, then you're gonna have mediocre results. But if you
Mm-hmm.
have really important questions and you're set in doing what you need to do, then you're okay. It's just like the religious aptitude that one has when one goes to a place of worship.
Right,
uh,
right. They're
that
going for a
seriousness
purpose.
should be there,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something that you have to take into consideration. Now, if you are not in that program, then you can go to anybody and you're going to have fun and whatever, because that's part of it. But in terms of what you are asking me, I recommend as a traditional astrologer that people look for tradition. It can be
Mm-hmm.
Jyotish, it can be any other school, but it
Yeah.
should be traditional. And once again, what we discussed later in the previous videos, what does make traditional astrology traditional? A lot of things, but one thing is the most important: that absolute and total truth exists, and
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
not negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
That is not subjective or relative. Absolute truth exists, and that is the logos, right?
Right,
Logos,
right. Logos.
astrology, the
So
logos of the
if
star.
I might say so, Fernando, maybe the idea that would be good to abide by here is that it is good to see the objective school and techniques and the way that an astrologer abides by the validity in their techniques through
Yes, you
an
could say
upholding
that.
of
You
tradition.
could say that. But
And within that,
technique is below the
right,
cosmological. It must
right.
be a philosophical. That's the most
Mm-hmm.
important thing. Techniques come as a
As
secondary aspect
yes,
of that.
I agree
Correct.
with this, right? But my idea, I guess, is that we all ought to look for a concern in the astrologer's sense of validity and tradition. From there, once we have an objective school that we kind of
Okay.
have found we agree with, from there, trying out different astrologers in the same train of thought gives us a sense of which astrologers can deal with absolute truth in a way that best fits or best gives us the information in the best
Yes, but the
way that
most
we see
important
getting.
thing before that for a
Mhm.
client
Yeah.
is to know the questions they're asking and why they're going to an astrologer.
Hmm.
Because going to astrologer is because you need to go there, because you
Hmm.
don't go to a doctor if you're not sick. You don't go
Right.
to a doctor to ask him, hey, tell me about my body, how am I feeling, how's my health? No, no, no,
Yeah, yeah,
you go
yeah.
to a doctor when you are sick, right?
Yeah, right,
And
right,
at the
right.
same time, the idea of sickness is has to be seen from a traditional perspective, which is
Hmm.
the idea that the physical manifestation of illness is a direct result of the spiritual manifestation of illness. And in order
Hmm.
to have a physical manifestation, you need to have a spiritual manifestation first. So you go
Certainly.
to an astrologer because of that reality. And that's what I mean with entertainment and the idea of just being quirky and just creating this idea of selling something that is not necessarily astrology, but just
Yeah.
part of this of the capitalistic world we live in, and the
Hmm.
consumerist culture that we were born in, we're gonna die in.
Right.
That's very important.
And
Yes,
so
sir.
I would like to ask you, I often find that a lot of astrologers, I'm curious about this. This is an offshoot question for you,
Ah,
Fernando. A lot of astrologers often convey that there are things that you come to for an astrologer. You look for, it's like the deepest gouges in your soul aesthetic and desires and goals and dharma. Now, within what all these things are, when you go to an astrologer, his expertise is not in working out how to make that mission fit the life in all the little details that you necessarily need to. So that's why some astrologers recommend also having like a therapist, also recommend having some kind of what we'd almost call a Western psychological based objectivism approach, a
well,
reductionism
I don't
where
recommend. I wouldn't recommend that. But yes, I understand what you're
you
saying,
understand.
and yes, that is something common, and I think it's very ethical to a certain
Mm-hmm,
degree.
mm-hmm,
But I
mm.
don't recommend that. I don't
As
recommend
yeah,
going to a psychologist. No.
I'm kind of in the same place, although I can
Yeah.
see where there would be times where a psychologist is going to give me things that an astrologer is not trained to take information out in the same way. So I think that a therapist can be useful in that way, but I appreciate where you're at, which is that ultimately astrology can be that be all end all. And different astrologers can really get to that place if they are, if an astrologer is the same price as a therapist. I mean, I think you're getting more with an astrologer. Plus, the astrologer can take you through all those little details if you let them be that type of
The
counselor.
thing is that today many therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists also do astrology. So you're getting both in a lot of the modern people who do astrology today. I don't recommend people to go to psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't
Who
recommend
doesn't?
pharmacological, psychological drugs. I think they're killing people. I don't recommend that. What I recommend people is what I tell everybody. You know, you want to improve your life, then you gotta get tough with yourself. And there are 5 things you only need in life, and they're all free. I mean, they're all free from an economical perspective, but they're not free because you gotta put effort into it. Yeah. It's just 3 things. What is the only thing you can control your life? Yourself. So the first 3 things that you do have to concern yourself: sleep, diet, and exercise. You have to sleep 7 to 8 hours every day. Exercise 45 minutes every day, even if it's walking until the day you die. And diet, you got to cut sugars, you got to start eating well, and you got to be, you know, aware of what you're putting to your body, because even though that is, even though that's not the most important thing, you know, what you put into your body is important. Then the 4th thing that you need to do is surround yourself with enriching environments and enriching people. Is the place you're working, the places you're going, enriching? Yes or no? Yes, stay there. No, move. And if you change the first 3, you're going to change the 4th. And the most important people who enrich you: relationships, your business partners, your
family, your friends.
The thing with family is that there's blood there. And the thing is that people who do not have blood ties to you or are not married to you, you know, you can just, you know, create space and look for others. But with blood, you know, there are things that you can't, you know, family is the most important thing. You know, you have to make space, you got to give time, correct, but you just can't cut with them unless, you know, we have very drastic situations, which do happen, but that is not the norm. Then after the 4th, the most important thing that is far superior to psychology, which once again is a counter science from the 19th century, created by Jewish groups of intelligentsia that have nothing to do with our tradition, which is just a counterfeit of the Catholic confession, because that is what therapy is in terms of psychoanalysis as it started. You know, better than anything else is that you develop your relationship with God. And that is the thing that will help you.
That's the thumb.
In the end of the world. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean real religion. I don't mean any of this hocus pocus propaganda. You know, you need to get devoted to a tradition. And I always recommend 3, you know: Indian, Islamic, or Christian. Everything else is just secondary. There are certain things in Asia which are good, you know, Taoism, you know, Confucianism is good, but the rest, you know, it's just
it's not
deviations from the truth. So
that's
I recommend
place to go,
and you need to submit to God, and that is what is going to change your life, because in the end you cannot change the chart. You cannot change what life gives you. You know, free will stems from the ability to be able to carry that cross and be able, this is the cross I have to carry, so I'm going to carry it. So the way you change the movie is not changing the things. The way you change the movie is changing the projector, right? Changing the movie that's projecting.
The script,
and situations that were cumbersome to you are not cumbersome no more, because you understand the situation. And that is the most important thing, but that's the hardest for many people, right?
Yeah, it's actually getting into the self.
They are in different, you know, vicious cycles. They are in negation. They're traumatized. They have problems. And instead of fixing those problems, which is done through willpower, it's done through action, it's done through determination of the 5 things I told you, then, you know, they're going to look for any type of, you know, drug or high, or how do you call it? A patch? A patch or anything like that.
A patch, like a band-aid.
Yeah, a filler, you know, a filler, instead of just refurbishing the whole boat. And that's the thing. And many people, it's difficult to do that. Then you need like coaches or life coaches or people who or trainers or that sort of thing, which unfortunately is just a result of how immature, but how childish we are today. Because society wants you like a little child in a perpetual state of immaturity,
and then so that somebody can put their hand
so
over
you can
your
be
head.
A consumer. So you can be a consumer. So you don't understand what being a man is or being a woman is. So you don't understand what responsibility is, what adulthood is, because today adulthood is just a legal term. Are you 18 or older? Oh, you're an old. Oh, you're 21 or old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good one.
But you see people who are 60, 50, 80, 70 who act like 15 years old. And that's the reality of things since the baby boomers till now, where nihilism is just a norm of society.
No
so
kidding.
all these things are things that a priest might tell you, are things that an imam can tell you, are things that a pandit can tell you. And that is part of the tradition. And that's what a traditional astrologer does. A modern astrologer will tell you, no, Fernando, but things have changed. We have evolved. Evolution does not exist. Change does not exist. We still live exactly the same as we did 2,000 years ago. Of course, there is a superficial technological mirage that many people think, well, no, it's the same. That's why the significations of the houses work today, worked 1,000 years ago, and will work, God willing, in 1,000 years from now.
Still got 5 fingers, 5 limbs, and 5 organs.
People, a man, a woman get married, father, daughter, friends, enemy. It's the same thing. So that is part of what I'm trying to say. And I'm sorry I'm speaking a lot, but I'm trying to project what I mean to say, because it is something that many people in the field feel but are not able to translate into words. But at the same time, it's something that many people feel who are completely against, because it just represents what they're running away from.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting to think of the idea that astrology has always been put in the context of a non-secular, of a divinatory, revelatory art
society.
And science.
Right? Society.
It was been in this type of society. And so now it's interesting to think that, like, there's a lot of people who probably advocate for what we could call like an atheistic secular approach to astrology. And I'm sure that there's lots of people doing that.
Abhorrent, which is just
it's
primitive.
It's an intrinsic contradiction.
It's
in
primitive.
A certain way.
It's involution, it's decadence.
Well, I know a lot of people who speak the language of atheism. Like, for example, and I play with these people and I challenge their thoughts.
No, me too.
A lot of the times, as soon as somebody uses the word God, we are really talking about the sublimely autonomous dimensions of consciousness that exist within inside of everything. And so when we talk about the word God, that's what we're talking about. It's the autonomous nature. I often refer to God as the mystery of energy and archetype.
That's just a bore, but we've been discussing God for more than 2,000 years. So there is a whole bunch of bibliographical references in terms of theological concepts that many people today are just not willing to address because
over it because of the sacred nature of it.
No, we're talking about a war against religion and a war against God and a war against truth. Yes. So the terminology, even though we speak about God, we're speaking about a trinity, right? You're speaking about the logos. We're thinking about the creator of the world, right? And that is something that many people are not willing to address because there is a war and they're part of that war against truth.
And so
they just describe it in a terminology which is general, which is the one you alluded to. But there are terms, and we've been thinking and talking about God since the beginning of time. It's not just the last 200 years, right?
You are correct, Fernando. You are correct. Like my consciousness here is that when any group of people find themselves in a tither over some kind of consciousness, I find, and maybe it's just the Venus coming out of me, because you're being your sun out my karaka, so maybe I should give the space for what you are saying as the Venus, which could frustrate the sun, and this is just the nature of our conversation, but I understand it. I think that oftentimes when there is division between two groups, it is often a good thing to try to use honey. You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Use the seduction of making them understand that
definitely.
They are not as different from the sacred religious
definitely.
people.
Diplomacy.
Diplomacy that's the name of my game. And so that's where I often come from this place, is that when people apply atheism and secularism to astrology, I think that it is a place where if people come to astrology, I think it has spirituality written in it. And those who say that they are mundane atheistic holders of a language that's atheistic and secular, they might not realize that they are applying dharma by talking about the ninth house. They are applying,
and they're doing exactly, precisely what the systems wants them to do, to think that way. Yeah.
I
So
agree,
in the
but
end, it's just part of the program. Yeah.
yes, and I think what's going to happen with people like that is that as astrology and the world goes on, if you and I are correct, because I lean more towards your divinatory consciousness, which is that speaking in the language of astrology as being sacred and not
Yes.
profane, being
Yes.
divine, and
Yes.
us being the divine embodiment of this ancient art and science. This is the where I lean, and I think that the truth of this will be made obvious when everybody shares the open microphone of astrology, and those who the divine people are the ones who are going to stand.
Yeah, the problem is, Dustin, that there's a war against that type of outlook. That's the problem, right?
Oh, well, just like there was a war at Kurukshetra, but Arjuna and Krishna still won.
But the thing is that you are correct, but the idea that truth will just manifest itself, and it's true, it will manifest itself, and you cannot destroy truth, because truth is, but there is a war, a whole mechanized, organized advance to destroy that, not only in astrology but everywhere in society
and culture in the world.
So it's not a matter of stretching an olive branch. It's a matter of, realizing that this has been going on for a long time now, quite a few centuries. So yeah, I do agree with that. It is a divinatory, but more than that, it is spiritual, and it's a gateway towards reconnecting with that transcendence and that God that we have been cut from in the last 100 years, very intensely in the last 100 years, but for a bit more since the Enlightenment and the revolutions from the 19th century. And yeah, truth is astrology. Certainly. And absolute truth exists, and there's a war against that, and you're gonna see it. People are just gonna be mad when they hear what I say in your comments, because they're programmed in a way
they're used to it.
That is just part of how the system wants them to be. They want them to be obedient, subservient, and you are doing that by being an atheist, by being an acolyte of historical materialism, of atheistic historical materialism.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, ultimately for me, if there is a Zen monk sitting on a boat, eating his very small amount of fish and not thinking about the Trimurti, not thinking about Christ consciousness, but he's giving more to the world than he's taking, then I would call him an expression of divine spiritual consciousness, whether he aligns with Krishna and Christ and divine religion as we attend it. So I know that for me, I think this is just the nature of this conversation for us, Fernando, because I think that we are both working towards the plight of the same fight, the same consciousness. I think that I just will always do it in a way that invites everybody to see that this is more of a game than a war, that we don't need to shed blood over. I don't think that you're the type that thinks that either. But
no, shedding blood, no. Yeah, the only thing left to save is your soul.
Right. Awesome, Fernando. So that being said,
and the blood that will be shed is the blood of people like myself.
Probably more than anything. Who are standing at the pulpit.
Yeah, because that's the people like myself are the people that people want to lynch,
Well, we need people like you to keep us on our toes,
because in the end, with truth, you can only be a devotee or a martyr. You know what I mean? And that's what history teaches. Yeah.
Very good, Fernando. So I'd like to pull us a little bit into more of our astrological consciousness here. Now, we are kind of talking about these sorts of things. A lot of times when people get into astrology, there is a frustrating thing that happens where, especially young astrologers, a lot of the times when I do these interviews really, in a lot of ways, are aimed at beginner astrologers.
Very good.
Who can go astray because, I've been doing astrology clients for only like a year and a bit. And I've already seen a lot of things that I could talk about, beginner things.
And you're going to see a lot more.
Oh, there's a lot more. I'm still young in this game. So one of the things that
Me
I
too, by
often
the
see,
way. Me too.
yes,
I've only been doing this for 8 years, 9 years now. Yeah, eight,
right.
nine
And
years.
clients, you've been doing clients for that long?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wonderful,
But at
Rob.
the beginning they were just very informal.
Yes,
But yeah,
gotcha.
so
But
far
now you've got a
eight,
thing
eight,
happening.
eight, seis, siete, ocho, 8 to 9 years now. Yeah.
Good, good, Fernando. So I want to ask you, often what happens in astrology sessions, young astrologers in particular get bent out of shape out of this, or I should say astrologers who are just getting into the game, where they see a fixed picture of karma in the natal chart. And they can convey this to their client. They say, I think that you're experiencing yourself being stuck. Let's say they got Sun, Saturn conjunct. So the person says, I feel stuck. A young astrologer says, oh, well, you've got the Sun conjunct Saturn, so you're definitely going to be stuck. Oftentimes, it's difficult for an astrologer to apply some way of making the client understand the nature of that stuckness, understand how to get out of it the best I can, and also to understand that at some level, that stuckness is a part of who they are. They have to abide by what that is. But ultimately, a lot of young astrologers find that they don't know how to get their client out of being stuck.
That's not their problem.
That's not the astrologer's problem.
The astrologers, that's not the astrologer's problem.
The astrologer's problem is to answer questions.
Correct.
Okay. That's very good for now.
I just want to say a few things about this.
Please.
Before we get into the particularities of what you're saying, you have to remember that today there isn't an international organism of astrology. There are different groups, there are a couple in the States, there are a couple in India. There are hardly any in the Latin American countries. But the point is that there isn't a protocol. There isn't like an organization that regulates astrology. So it's a free-for-all. It's the wild, wild west.
Yeah, it really is.
So studying astrology, becoming an astrologer is a very bumpy ride, and you can come from a lot of places. So that has its pros, but that also has its cons. And its cons is that anybody can call themselves an astrologer and be an astrologer and can teach astrology. And there are many approaches, many viewpoints. People don't distinguish the things that I've said in the past videos between tradition and modernity. There are a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of holes. So that's the first thing that people have to have in mind if they want to become a practicing astrologer. You first of all, the thing before you get to clients, let's start from the beginning. You have to read. Okay. Astrology is not an excuse for you to ignore reading, which is something that does happen and a lot, unfortunately. So you got to read, you got to practice, you got to study, you got to see videos, you got to look at the sky before, years before you start talking to people, because that was the way it was supposed to. And before that, you need to know how to think. Logic, rhetoric, grammatic, philosophy. You need to know it's simple stuff. Before that, you need to arithmetic, geometry, even music. It's part of the quadrivium. And then astronomy. You got to know what the ecliptic is. You got to know where east is, where west is. Why, when you call the ecliptic is south in the northern hemisphere, why is it north in the southern hemisphere? You got to learn the planets, the movement. You got to learn a lot of things before you start talking to people, and that is basic. And fortunately, that does not happen. Okay? So the first thing that you need to know is that you got to study. You got to learn the basics. And when you feel you know the basics, like it was my experience, you start looking for teachers. And I looked for a lot of teachers. I found two. I was with Ryan and another one, and then I found another, and then I'm with another teacher, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning other stuff. So you gotta submit yourself to somebody who already has that experience, and from him, you gotta understand what you haven't understood, and then after you go all through that process, you start learning how to deal with clients. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you how I deal with clients. I do not sell myself as an astrologer in public. Obviously, I have an internet persona and I have my website. I do sell myself there, but I'm not going out there saying, I'm an astrologer. Look at me. Give me your time of birth. Let's talk. No. I don't do that. I don't talk about that because those are not astrologers. Those are just kids. Okay. So you don't do that.
Yep.
You don't do that.
Yep.
If you want to talk astrology to get a girl, well, yeah, maybe, but that's another dimension. You know, if you want to impress somebody, yeah, but it has to be based upon questions. The astrology does not open doors. You know, he doesn't go knocking for doors and opening them. No, no, no. The astrologer opens the door when somebody knocks at his. So this is very important. Questions, questions, questions.
Wow, I love the way you put that.
When you deal with a client, it's questions. What do you want? I just want to learn about myself. Why? Because I want to learn. Why? And she goes, next one.
Yeah,
that's the important thing.
She's not giving me the fun experience.
Exactly. Why do you want to have an experience? Oh, because I want to learn. Okay, if she's paying you, then you have an obligation, right? If she's paying you, then you gotta teach, right? What I do when I get those types of clients, you know, I'm not gonna piss on them because they already paid. So you know, I'm gonna be diplomatic. So I start teaching them, and that's what I do when clients come up and they already paid. And they don't have an idea. Well, you go step by step and you take them and you start teaching them. And then you use their chart as an element to teach.
Right.
And then you start, because that is the thing, you need to do the questions. And at the same time, when you're dealing with clients, if you've gone through all the things that I talked about, questions. Do not use your intuition. Do not use any psychic powers. You don't have psychic powers, because if you had psychic powers, you wouldn't be doing astrology. And I've met people who have those types of inclinations, and they are the type of people that most people don't realize, because they have a false Hollywood image of what that is and not the reality of things, right? So don't use your intuition. Just talk to the person. Ask him. Where do you work? What do you do for when I do a reading? I ask them, what do they do? If they're married, if they have children, if they were divorced, their parents, they're dead or alive, and that's what I work with.
Cool.
And start talking to them, right?
Really from their experience and asking questions.
Right. And if the client does not know anything, teach them. If they are confused, they're going to be confused. That's none of your business.
Right.
The business is for you to answer their questions. If they don't have questions, they shouldn't be there sitting with you. So you tell them, God bless you. You don't have any problems. Good for you.
Cool. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah. And if they pay, because a lot of people will just
if they pay, if they pay you, then there is a contractual obligation.
Well, it's true, but I just mean a lot of people just need to be told by an astrologer that they're not actually in that bad of a place as they think. You know, they just had they've been sleeping.
Well, if they have the questions, and it has to do with that they're in a bad place, and you see the chart and effectively there are bad things, then you have to tell them.
Yes.
But you know, you have to be diplomatic and ethical. This is very important. Ethics. Ethics in astrology is something that unfortunately is not present in a lot of astrologers. And I include myself, because I've done very unethical things in the past that I don't do anymore. And I'm not going to talk about them, obviously, because I'm not going to put it in the record. But the thing is that
it's part of the game.
When you study any profession, you know, you learn ethics, you know, and that's something that's been totally forgotten from our curriculums, because we no longer teach from a religious perspective, because for ethics,
consolidating in
for ethics, you need religion, because that's the thing that will tell you what's good and bad. Of course, there is modern ethics with Kantian ethics and all that, but that's modernity, and that created other problems. But the thing is that we no longer know what's right and wrong. But when you do astrology, you got to understand that, and that's why traditional astrology is important, because that is going to give you the keys to understand what is right and what is wrong. And what is wrong. Don't tell people things that they haven't asked for, specifically if they're bad. What is ethics? If the person is sick or psychologically sick more than anything, she's confused, he's confused, or whatever, it's not your problem. You know, your problem is to make a business and give a service. Their lives is their lives. Don't get into their lives.
Totally.
You know, if you're a life coach and you want to charge for that, cool, but that's not astrology. If you want to be this type of person who's there, you know, cheering and being a cheerleader, you can do that, but that's not astrology. And I wouldn't recommend that if you don't have the proper training in counseling. Okay.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I totally see where you're at there because there's lots of astrologers who probably love being in that cheerleading role. And there are people who come to
They're not
them.
as that's not astrology.
I get it. I get it. Because even though they can get excited about this person is trying to do, let's say an artist is struggling to possibly get, like they're putting all of their eggs into this one project that's taking all their time and money. And the astrologer can't see that it's not going to work out. But the person is excited about it, and the astrologer is, oh, like, come on, you can do it. And then the astrologer can get them all stoked about something that completely wastes time in their life.
And not only that, Dustin, that also represents the unorganized way in which many people learn astrology today, because in the ancient past, medieval times, you would learn Prashna first. You would learn horary. And then you would move on to electional, and then you would move on to natal. Today, you just jump into natal without realizing the horary aspect. And what you're talking to me is a question, right? Yeah. And with Prashna and horary, you can answer that. And knowing the principles, you know that how things are going to work, and then you can see them with the times systems and all that. But in the end, once again, it depends on the questions of the client. And a client is a client. You cannot develop a personal relationship with a client.
Right.
The client is not your business. It's not your problem. Just like a doctor, his patient, there is, well, a doctor is not a good idea, but any person who offers a service, you have to have limits, right?
Yeah. And you can't let your attachment to the enjoyment of the person's experience block you from seeing what you're doing.
If you have that, you shouldn't be doing astrology. If you have that, you have to take a break and realize what you're doing.
Realize what you're doing.
If somebody does that, then awesome, they have to get friends,
Yeah. And
they have to have a more active social life,
so that they're not
they have
so
to
attached.
Get hobbies. Yeah.
Got it. Very clear, Fernando. Very clear, man. That's awesome. I don't know if it seems obvious to you what you're saying, but I think
it is. No, it is obvious. It's common sense.
It is,
but people today don't have common sense. That's the problem.
I think that might be the case, my friend. And
because they don't teach us how to think. They don't teach us how to think. 2 + 2 is always 4. The sun will always come in the morning. A harmony in a piano is a harmony. Good and bad exist, and that is the thing that we've lost, which has turned astrology into a joke, and it has also turned our whole society in a joke. That is the crisis of the modern world. And I'm sorry, I've spoken too much.
No, it's good, Fernando. It's good. I mean, so that does make sense to me, is that common sense is something that is definitely slipping from astrologers these days.
Yeah.
So this is very good when we think of what we're trying to deal with as astrologers. Now, something I'd like to ask you, does it happen often? I'm almost thinking about the way that you're framing everything here, because you're really relating to everything just based on a client's questions. And I'm almost thinking that if a client comes,
if it's not based in questions, what is it going to be based on? Just ask yourself that question.
Well, it's this weird intuition coming from the astrologer to the client. And I understand where you're at there. So I have to ask, maybe the reason that this might come up for most astrologers is because they're not applying themselves in the right way. But I'm going to tell you what's on my piece of paper right now.
It's just faulty training. It's just the idea that anybody can do astrology today.
Right.
And there isn't there's no schools of astrology. Just think about it. The only place that I know of is Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan in India, and by a school I mean like officialized by the government, by the state.
Yes, yeah, right. So but I have to ask you.
There are a lot of teachers like Ryan, which by the way is a very good place to start learning the Vedic astrology, because he emphasized the basics, Ryan, which is the only thing you really need if you think about it. But the idea of being ratified like the Middle State Association in the States do with colleges and high schools doesn't exist. So it's just a failure of a pedagogical institution. There's no pedagogical approach to the teaching of astrology, and that's why it has become something more of a teacher apprentice thing, because that's the only way today where you can learn it. But the thing is, from what teacher, right? Which is another, like we say in my island, that's another $20. That's an expression we say here. Those are another $20 because you need a teacher, but what type of teacher? And that's why you need to understand the idea of tradition and modernity, the dichotomy. continue dusting.
Yeah, very good, Fernando. I love it. Well, the main question I wanted to ask you is, does it often happen for you that you are talking to a client in an astrology reading, you are abiding by the truth that you see unfolding in the chart and in the person, and you feel like you are right about what you are anticipating in the person, and the person is not picking up what you're putting down, and they disagree generally with the direction that you wanted to take them with their question?
Usually, no, that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen to you.
No.
Okay, so would you say that that's mostly because you're basically mostly just answering the question in the way that is seen in the chart, and it always accurately hits?
I just no. It's not a question of hitting, or it's just you read what you read. Mm-hmm. It's like reading music. Mm-hmm. You just read what it says.
Right.
And in the beginning, I did have that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let me just rephrase that. When I started, but then I developed my system, because in the end, Dustin, which was what I said at the beginning of the interview, you got to develop your own style. And the only way you're going to do that is having experience. We say here, having court, like having basketball court, like having your experience court. In the court. Yeah.
Right.
So no, in my experience, that usually doesn't happen.
Good. I'd say it's a good
especially with horaries. And let me rephrase that, because when I started doing prashnas, I was nervous in terms of, I'm not gonna get it. Oh God.
There's
I'm
so
not
much
gonna,
that
I'm not gonna, I mean, because I didn't have the faith, right? I didn't have the correct framework in order to understand what I was doing. But then you understand that the only thing you need to do is answer the damn question with the rules that you know. That's it.
Right.
That's it. And the rest is just falls into place, right?
I agree with that, because that's the experience I have too. The only time really that I think I'm in the same place, really, because most
but
times
I'm sorry, let me say something.
Go ahead.
Because I've had those experiences.
Yeah. So have I.
Not a lot, but I think I've had that after I started. I think I had that like once. And I'm thinking about the client right now, and I'm not going to name names, because once again, an astrologer is like a priest. You don't go out tell everybody the sins of the person you just confessed.
For sure.
So, that's not ethical. Once again, ethical. And I was let me just say that before I say what I was going to say. I was a waiter for a long time in a fine dining restaurant.
Oh, cool.
And that was the money I used to pay for my studies and my books and everything. But the point is that sometimes a man would come with a woman, and then the next week he would come with another woman, and then he would come the week after that with another woman, and you just have to be like a priest, hello, welcome. And that's the ethics of that job, and you have to have the same ethics with clients. And I don't talk about clients specifically, but I would just want to mention this particular client. Please. Where the client tried to emphasize something, and the client had a history of going to different astrologers.
That was okay. That was what I was going to say.
That's a red flag
astrologers
right there. Actually, that's a red flag for plastic surgeons. When a person comes to a plastic surgeon and they say, well, I went to this guy and he didn't say, no, that's a red flag. Wow. Because that is a person that can bring you a lot of trouble in terms of suing you. But the same thing is with clients. And I'm thinking about two specific cases that I've had.
Yep.
When a person comes that has already had experience with other astrologers who are trying to get something particular and emphasizing it, those are the people who are difficult. And they are difficult because they are madly trying to control life. They're madly trying to control time. They're madly trying to control, and that is problematic.
It's certainly, right? I almost see that the astrologer is only the messenger of time, and this person is shooting
the artist. The artist, yes,
and
the herald.
This client who's all angry and trying to control things, they're essentially shooting the message.
Passive aggressive at the beginning, then angry, and then they will move on to another astrologer, and the vicious cycle will continue again with another person. Those are the two cases, I believe. But now hardly ever, because even though I do activities here where I live for tourists, where I dress up, and you can see it in my Instagram. And
Cool.
there, you're being subcontracted, so you're more marshmallow there. You know what I mean? You're more happy-go-lucky, and there is an incentive for putting on a show,
right?
Because you're being subcontracted,
right.
But when you are doing the practice one-to-one, you got to be based in questions. What does the client want? Why did that client, the first thing I tell clients, this is a basic protocol for everyone, and I recommend this. And if I ever have a school, I will oblige people to do this if they practice astrology. When you practice astrology and you have a session of a natal type or whatever session, you need to do two things when you start. Well, three things. One is get prepared. Get ready.
Get prepared.
That can be anything, I usually get ready 40 minutes before. Whatever. And if you don't want to get ready,
breathe,
you don't want to. No, I mean study the chart.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
Study the chart.
Yep.
Stretch. I pray.
I'm there.
I pray.
Yeah.
But
I'm with you.
Get ready. I pray. That's something I always do when I feel I need to pray. I pray. But the thing is that, prepare yourself. If you don't want to prepare yourself, cool. If you are an expert like a colleague of mine who's been doing it for 40 years here in Puerto Rico, then I mean, cool, whatever. But I would recommend that. That is something that is, that would be the alternative. It's not obligatory, but the following two things have to be obligatory.
Gotcha.
Number one, the first thing you do, you ask, well, not ask, but you tell the client the information you have that you have used to get the chart. That's the first thing you need to do. I don't know, Dustin, were you born in Yes. Correct.
Good.
Proceed.
Good.
That's the first thing you need to do in terms of protocol.
I'm with you on that. I've had that. Yeah.
And the second one. Hello, Dustin. Thank you for contacting me, whatever. May I ask you, I read your email, your information I already told you, whatever. I saw your chart, whatever. I want to ask you, what drove you to contact me, and what are you expecting from this meeting? And most than anything else, what is it that you want to know or want to get out of this experience?
Do you do that?
That's how
in
you
an
start.
email before?
No.
Oh,
no.
That's
In the email, I ask. First of all, I have different offers in my website, and they can add whatever. And then I send them a generic email, and then if it applies to them, you fill in the information. I always ask for sex, the basic stuff, sex, and I always emphasize that you should have time of birth from a historical document. That is very important. Very important in order to be very serious about it. If you don't have a historical document of your time of birth, look for it. And don't do astrology until you get it. And if you don't have it, keep looking for it, because you're going to find it if God is willing. And then I ask them, generic questions. What do you do? You're married, children, father, mother. And then we get into the meeting. And this is the expensive one. This is the one where you are like me here soon. So I asked them to corroborate the information of birth. And then I asked them what I just told you. And then we start from there. And obviously, they usually send you questions in the email, and you prepare with anyway. And that's how you do it. That's how you should do it. Now, horary, I used to have a table in a farmer's market, and I used to do horary. And usually it's really funny, because that's very sad. Today we just talk about natal chart is just natal chart. Natal chart is just a manifestation of the modern world, because in the ancient times it was only applied to kings. Because in the end, people didn't know their time of birth 300 years ago, and they didn't even know their date of birth.
And it probably didn't matter as much.
No, it didn't.
Because everyone's doing that. What are you gonna? You're a Scorpio sun with Sagittarius moon, and then you're gonna go out into the fields and pick rice.
Exactly. And not only that, you didn't need that, because you had a society that was based in God, and religion would help you deal with these things that today we don't have anything to deal with. So horary astrology was used to answer questions, and that is what we need to re-establish today, because that is, first of all, the perfect way to start learning astrology. It's really fun. It's really fun. I really love doing prashnas and doing horaries. And that is how you would deal with clients, because they had a question. Where's my cat? I remember a guy who was going to buy a boat. And that was really fun because it's the only time in my experience where anybody has asked me about a boat, and things about travel, things about, I remember once, it's really funny. It was like 3 months before the pandemic, or like 2 months, something like that. And I had like in the same day 2 people that asked me about trips, and both of them said, no, you're not gonna, there's something wrong, like you're gonna get sick and it's gonna be bad.
Wow.
And then you get the thing about the virus, which is really interesting.
Horror
is super cool.
I gotta admit, I've never gone into it like I'd like to.
Yeah, natal was something that was taught after horary and lectional. So, and it's really sad because many people don't know what horary are. They don't, prashna in Sanskrit, they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because what they've been sold is this massified, modern, consumerist, caricaturistic version of what astrology is, with these, the horoscope, which is not even the sun sign. Horoscope means the ascendant.
Right.
Horoscopes of the 12 signs, and, neatly packaged in order for stupid women to buy them and spend money, which is, the original purpose of all this newspaper.
I've
crap.
seen, and
it just, it de-evolves into something very vulgar, which is the state of astrology today. And all these things that we're mentioning, is very important, because I used to have that table and I did horaries, and it was really cool because I talked about people about astrology, and people were fascinated because it is a history and it is a thing that is not thought. And it's very funny.
Like you were at like a farmer's market with a table, and you were like, who wants to do astrology? That's sick, dude.
But we stopped because of the COVID.
Oh, right.
And they started again, but you have to use mask, and I said, fuck that shit, I'm not gonna do that. And they didn't like me there. I was a weirdo. But the thing is that it was
not
fun.
bad to be a weirdo.
I did that like for almost a year.
It's like you're jamming, you're like busking. That's
sick.
And
I would do it in restaurants also, and I did it in a restaurant, and I did it. I was doing 4 times a week. Wow! Before
no
COVID.
kidding.
I was doing it in a farmer's market on Sundays. I was doing it on Mondays on a bookstore. I was doing it on Tuesdays on a cafe where they read poetry. That was nice.
Nice.
And I would do it on Wednesdays on a Mexican restaurant.
Wow. Was your intention to kind of pull people into like the bigger thing, or were you just really doing pretty okay with that as a busking?
Yeah, but I wasn't making a lot of money because I charge like when I do that, I just charge $1 per minute.
Right. That's pretty cool.
I charge $1 per minute. I think that's reasonable. But when we have big activities that are oriented toward pagan stuff, man, the last one I did, I sat at 9 a.m. and I stood up at 7 p.m. I didn't stop. And it felt like 2 hours. There's like an activity here. Puerto Rico is like a small place, but you have one. They didn't do it for 2 years because of the COVID, but we recently did it a few months ago.
And it's like a pagan get together.
Pagan. You got Wicca people. There's a lot of Wicca here, and things like that. And I'm there because it's the only thing that's here. We're like a small city. It's a very small place. But the thing is that has been my experience dealing with people. So it's questions. And once again, you do not go opening doors. Do not do that. You're going to get in trouble. It's not going to work. You got to let people come to you. Like the teacher's ready when the student appears. Well, the astrology is ready when the astrologer is ready when the client appears.
Cool. Awesome. Fernando, you've given me so much good stuff today. Now I'm just noticing that we're getting close to our hour mark here, buddy. It always goes fast, but this has been such a good conversation. I don't know
if I answered your questions. I kind of
went
off.
No, buddy, you totally nailed it. I mean, I think I was just asking you. The last one I asked was, if a client has trouble with your message, what was your like attitude to understanding?
Usually it doesn't happen anymore.
No kidding.
If it happens, it's a problematic client
of the background, like you're kind of
and I've only had 2 that I can remember.
Awesome,
but because also there are other people that might disagree with you, but they're not going to tell you anything, and they just go away.
They quietly just sort of go away.
Which is the educated thing to do. That which is the
the
correct thing
civil,
to do, right?
civil. Yeah.
The civil
Yeah.
thing to do, right?
So
And at the same time, you have a persona and you sell yourself in a way that is going to attract people that are harmonious to the way you do your things, right?
that's what I figure too. The people who are meant to come to you
Yep.
are going to come to you. And if God wills it, it's going to be a good session. And if it doesn't, then it wasn't really the divine connection that was supposed
And
to
usually when people say, I'm stuck, usually those taking into consideration your example, which is not similar to mine, which I told you, because mine was the thing I told you about the two clients. When people feel stuck, then they don't need astrology. They just need to do the things I told you.
Right.
How's your diet? How's your sleep cycle? How is your exercise? Are you fat? Are you obese? Are you overweight? You need to lose weight.
I would like to ask you, Fernando. I was just going to ask, do you find a lot of the times that people come assuming that there was going to be some intense Rubik's cube inside their soul that the astrologer needs to figure out? And then you talk to them and you say, yeah, what you really need is to stretch your spine so that your hips aren't inflamed, and to have a good breakfast and to get a good sleep. That does
common
happen.
Sense.
Yeah,
common sense.
Right.
No, common sense. The idea, what's the most prominent drug right now? The most hardcore drug that we give to children every fucking day: sugar. Refined sugars, refined carbohydrates.
So right.
They're not bad. Don't get me wrong, because refined carbohydrates. But the thing is that we eat them so much that it's killing us, literally. Refined sugars. You go to a Walmart. I once went to a Walmart. I was really high, and I just had fun. And I went through all the middle lanes.
And
I started reading the ingredients. I swear to God, 90% of the things either had sugar or refined flour. And that is the thing that most people eat in our American and Canadian diets, and even Latin American diets. And that is something that is killing people. Diabetes, probably it's having an effect on autism. I don't know. There's so many things, because we are not accustomed to eating those amounts of refined carbohydrates in the quantities we're doing.
Totally.
We're not eating vegetables. We're not eating meat. We're not
eating biological matter.
We're not getting the proper nutrition that we need from macronutrients to function biologically correct. And many times when people are stuck, it's because they're living unhealthy lives. Why do you think so many people are afraid of the virus? Because they're living unhealthy lives. They're obese.
I agree with that.
They don't do anything. They sleep 5 hours. They're on drugs. They're on pills.
Really, the pandemic should have been a red light to everybody.
They have a job that they don't like. They have a wife that they don't like, a husband they don't like. They have no relationship to God. They have no religious inclination, no spiritual inclination, not even a crystal quartz. Okay. They don't have anything. They don't have anything. Well, that's why you're feeling stuck. Oh no, what I wanted to tell you, I wanted you to tell me that I was going to win the lottery or something like that. I remember the other day, I did the last time, a girl, well, I'm not going to say that, but it's the idea of just not understanding where you are and the war that is against truth and the crisis in which we are living. Which once again is just a big thing, and I do address it from my position as an astrologer. And if you want, we can end the video now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's okay, Fernando. But I will say we had a great session here today. I love just hanging out with you and talking with you about all this stuff. You've given me much of your time in the last little bit, and I really appreciate it, Fernando. Now, if there was anything you wanted to say in this interview before we cut, if do you got anything, last thoughts on your mind?
For people who are young, and by that I mean between 16 and 21, if you want to learn astrology, you gotta know a lot of things beforehand, right? In my opinion, you don't need to, but if you do, you're gonna be the best of the best.
No kidding.
And that is, traditional stuff. Learn how to write, learn how to think, learn logic, learn how to speak, right? And you know,
Fickle-mindedness.
and I'm sorry, you know, it's ironic because I'm speaking here and I obviously haven't used the English language in the proper way, but it's because it's my second language. But the
You're
thing
doing
is,
pretty good.
you need to learn how to think, to speak, to write. You need to learn math. You need to learn visual astronomy, and all these things are very easy. You know, I'm
Just
not
find the
telling you
right
to learn
teacher.
calculus. I'm telling you to learn geometry. You know, to understand that a diameter is in a position, it's 180 degrees, to understand where the ecliptic is, you know, to understand the constellations, where they come from, you know, Ptolemy, the Tetrabiblos, to learn also, you know, the Almagesto, which is the basis of how we understand astronomy today, you know, to learn, to study. Just don't fix yourself in the idea that I'm gonna tell a person how he is because I can tell the sun. And forget about that. That will come automatically.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
got to serve first. You got to do your time before you can.
astrologers are learned people, and in the past they were only men, and men who could read, and men who were, you know, specifically inclined toward a way of thinking from a very elitist group of society. So you got to learn that in the past these were the elite, the creme de la creme, right?
The
And it
arbiters
is
of
now,
society.
it is so vulgarized. It is so, you know, like giving pearls to pigs. So you're gonna see these things, and you need to address them. And I am addressing them from, you know, my small perspective, from my small place, you know, my little grain of sand that I do. But this is very important. If you want to transcend that, you got to submit yourself to a regimen of studying and doing things that you're supposed to, like Dustin and I did and me in my moment. You know, you need to look for teachers, and then you need to look for other teachers, and then you need to keep on reading because there's a lot of things that you need to know.
Certainly.
Now, if you don't want to do this, then, you know, you can call yourself astrology, but when you come and you meet people like myself, and you emphasize things, you know, I'm going to say that is incorrect, that is false. And you're going to see why. And you can either accept the facts, right? Or you can just, you know, stick to your opinions, which are not fact, which are false.
Which are
so in the end, you know, it's either truth or falseness. And that is the decision that you have to make. But the good thing is that learning astrology the right way is not hard. You know, especially today where we have all this information. The thing is that you have to have the willpower to read, to do the exercises, and to, you know, do what you have to do.
Explore the information that feels good in your heart and that's going to take you where you think you need to
go.
Well,
not that it feels good, but the things that you have a calling, right? And if you are clear in your mind, then, you know, the calling will guide you places, you know. But you have to be very, you have to be very firm, and you have to know yourself, you know, right? That's why astrologers, in my opinion, you know, you should do astrology after you're 20 something, you know, and even 30, you know, after Saturn, you know.
Study it for, like you said, like I think I've been studying it for about like 7, 8 years.
Well, you can study it studying since you're a teenager, but the idea of practicing it, I would say after Saturn return.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's a great way to put it, Fernando.
Because in ancient times, that was the time you learned the trivium and the quadrivium, which was what I told you. You learn how to write,
trivium,
how to think,
quadrivium.
How to speak, and then you learn geometry, you learn arithmetic, you learn music, and you learn astronomy. And then you apply that to horary, and then you apply that to electional, and then you apply that to natal. And if you're smart and a genius, you can move on to mundane, which is the collective. And then if you are having magical inclinations, you can do magical, which is an electional to do talismans. Then you can do a whole bunch of stuff, because it's just like any discipline. The thing is that we don't have universities that teach it anymore. We don't have schools. We don't have organisms. I mean, institutions organizations or institutions that regulate it. So it's a world among ruins, and this is the crisis in part of the modern world.
Sorry, I'm just gonna kill my phone for 1 second.
Don't worry about that. But yeah, if you want to finish,
usually pretty good about that. That's okay. Well, we're pretty much rearing to the end here anyway, Fernando. But I will say that I'm very glad that there are people like you who are laying out the pins so that humanity can see why it's important to educate themselves on a rubric of validity.
See again, exactly.
Reconnect. I love it. I love to see it, man. So
I hope
Fernando,
your audience like what I said, and just for them to know, I'm gonna be in the comments, answering questions if they wish.
love it, buddy. Well, Fernando, thank you so much for being here. And for everybody watching, if you want to get in touch with Fernando for a reading or just to see everything he's got going on, you can reach him on FernandoRaulAstrology.com. And you can also find Fernando Raul Astrology on YouTube.
Correct.
Wonderful, Fernando. Well, I'm going to go see whoever just called me. And
Okay,
I'm
cool.
figure that out. But this has been a really great session, buddy. I'll stop this for now and I'll say goodbye to you.
Okay.
For everybody watching, thanks so much for hanging out with me and Fernando. We'll see you guys on the next session.
Ciao, ciao.